Imagine discovering that the people you trusted most, the ones closest to you, were the very ones who betrayed you. That's exactly what happened to me. My father's death wasn't just a tragic accident, it was a calculated murder, planned by the people I thought I could trust. I was forced to fight back, exposing lies and uncovering dark secrets that shook my entire world. If you've ever felt like everything you knew was turned upside down, this video will show you the power of truth and justice. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to see how I fought back against the ultimate betrayal. It was a morning like any other when I received the call. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, and when I picked it up, my heart skipped a beat. The voice on the other end was shaky, but the words were clear enough. "Ethan, I'm afraid your father is dead." Richard West, my father, had always been a towering figure in my life. A self-made man, a brilliant businessman, and the kind of father who always seemed untouchable, even to those who tried to get close. He'd built our family's wealth from the ground up, brick by brick, never once showing weakness. He had been diagnosed with a rare form of cancer just 6 months ago, but I'd thought he had more time. He was always so strong, so resilient, but now that strength was gone. I couldn't wrap my head around it. My mind kept replaying the last few weeks, his tired face at family dinners, the way his voice had lost its usual authority. But there had been no warning, no hint that it would come to this so soon. I grabbed my coat and left the house without a second thought, driving through the streets in a daze. The air felt heavy, like a storm was brewing. When I arrived at the hospital, I expected the sterile, cold environment to somehow numb the reality. But it didn't. The scent of disinfectant and the low hum of medical equipment couldn't mask the grief in the air. I walked into the room where my father lay, and I felt a strange emptiness in my chest. It was as if the world had shifted and left me behind. The man who had shaped my life, the man who had always been my guiding force, was gone. I stood there for a long time, unable to say goodbye. I just stared at him, hoping that somehow he'd sit up and tell me it was all a mistake. But it wasn't. The cold, unyielding truth settled in. After a while, the nurse gently led me out of the room, saying that the family would be contacted for the next steps. I felt like I was moving in a fog, numb to everything. The funeral arrangements, the calls to distant relatives, the condolences, it was all a blur. And then, a few days later, came the notice. The will reading was scheduled. My father had left behind a legacy, and it was time to face whatever that would mean for me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was too much I didn't understand about the situation. My father had been a man of secrets, a man who didn't share much about his personal life or the decisions he made behind closed doors. Yet, I couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that his death, though a tragedy, might have been more than just the result of a battle with cancer. There was something I needed to uncover. The will reading loomed ahead, and I wasn't ready for it, but I had no choice. It was time to find out what Richard West had left me and what he had left behind. The day of the will reading arrived faster than I anticipated. I hadn't slept much the night before, the weight of my father's passing still hanging heavily over me, making each minute feel like an hour. I barely ate breakfast, my stomach a tight knot of anxiety and confusion. There was something about today, about that will, that gnawed at me, something that didn't sit right. I could feel it in my bones. I arrived at my father's office a little earlier than the scheduled time. The building felt empty, as though its walls had swallowed the life that once filled them. The polished floors gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and the smell of expensive wood mixed with the lingering aroma of my father's cigars. Everything felt cold, detached, like I was walking through a museum instead of a place that once held so many memories. The reading would take place in his private study, a room I'd spent countless hours in growing up. I remember sitting at his desk, watching him as he worked, never understanding fully what he did, but always admiring his determination. The study was large, lined with bookshelves filled with volumes on business, economics, and history subjects that shaped the man he became. It was also where he'd spent most of his time during his final months, his health deteriorating, but his mind sharp as ever. As I stepped into the study, I saw Vanessa already there. She was standing by the window, her back to me, her silhouette framed by the bright daylight. When she heard the door open, she turned around slowly, her perfect red lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hello, Ethan," she said, in that tone I had come to loathe, sweet, but sharp, like a blade wrapped in velvet. "Vanessa," I replied curtly, my gaze drifting past her to the table where the documents were already laid out. The thick envelope that contained my father's final words seemed to mock me, its weight somehow heavier than it should have been. Before I could approach it, the door opened again, and Richard Bennett walked in. My father's oldest friend, the man who had been by his side for decades. I had always thought of Richard as a second father, but in recent years, I'd started noticing cracks in that image. The way he always seemed to know just a little too much. The way his smile never quite reached his eyes. There was something about him, something I couldn't trust anymore. "Well, looks like we're all here," Richard said, his voice rich and deep, but with a nervous edge. He took a seat at the table, across from me, his fingers lightly tapping the surface, as if waiting for something. "Let's get this over with." I felt the tension building in the room as the lawyer, a middle-aged man in a dark suit, cleared his throat and opened the envelope. The silence was deafening, each of us waiting for the inevitable. "Mr. West's will is quite clear," the lawyer began, reading aloud. "To his son, Ethan West, he leaves the family estate, including all properties and assets within it." My heart skipped, but before I could process it, he continued, "However, there is a significant portion of the estate that will go to Vanessa, as she has been named in the trust established many years ago." I froze. "Vanessa?" I couldn't help but ask, my voice rising slightly. "How is that possible? She hasn't been involved in the business for years." The lawyer nodded, looking at the document in his hands. "It's all in here, Mr. West. Your father's instructions are clear. Vanessa's involvement was part of the original agreement when she and Mr. West were married. There's a stipulation in the trust that grants her a portion of the estate, which includes the residence and a percentage of the company's shares." Vanessa smiled again, her eyes glinting with something I couldn't quite place. "I knew your father had a soft spot for me," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. I turned to Richard Bennett, who had been silent until now. He was watching me closely, as if studying my every reaction. "What do you think of that, Ethan?" he asked, his voice almost a calm. "It seems your father had a lot more plans for the family than you thought." I didn't answer immediately. My mind was racing. There was something here I wasn't seeing. Something didn't add up. My father, sharp, calculating Richard West, wouldn't have left everything to chance like this. I could feel the pieces of the puzzle starting to shift, but I couldn't quite make sense of them yet. "We'll see what the rest of the documents say," I said, my voice tight. "But I have a feeling there's more to this than meets the eye." The lawyer nodded, continuing to read, but I was no longer listening. My mind was already working, trying to figure out the hidden meaning in my father's will, in Vanessa's smugness, and in Richard Bennett's silence. Something was off, and I was determined to find out what it was. The will reading had just begun, but I already knew that this was just the beginning of something far more dangerous than I had anticipated. The days following the will reading felt like a fog. The tension between Vanessa, Richard Bennett, and me hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the situation than what had been laid out on that cold, sterile table. My father, Richard West, had always been a man of principles at least that's what I'd believed. But something about the trust he'd left behind didn't sit right with me. I spent the next few days at his office, going through old files, trying to understand what he had left behind. My father was meticulous. Every decision he made, every contract he signed, was always documented, every receipt, every signature, every meeting. His office was a shrine to his hard work, a labyrinth of files, documents, and contracts. But it was here, in the stacks of old papers, that I began to uncover pieces of a truth I had never imagined. I was sitting at his desk one evening, going through a pile of old financial documents, when a small, worn leather binder caught my attention. It had no label, nothing that indicated its significance. I opened it slowly, as if afraid of what I might find. Inside were ledgers, handwritten notes, and a series of bank statements that looked out of place. They were dated back nearly a decade, long before I'd ever imagined there might be any secrets to uncover. As I flipped through the pages, a name kept appearing: Gerald Russo. The name didn't ring a bell, but the amounts of money listed under his company were staggering. There were wire transfers, offshore accounts, and countless mentions of dealings that seemed to skirt the edges of legality. My heart began to race as I realized what I was looking at. My father, the man who had always preached honesty and integrity, had been involved in shady financial dealings. He had invested in ventures with Gerald Russo, someone who was notorious in the business world for his connections to organized crime. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. My father had always kept his business dealings close to his chest, but this was something entirely different. There were records of payments to companies that didn't even exist anymore, tax loopholes that had been exploited, and investments in projects that seemed to vanish without a trace. I could feel my mind spinning, trying to make sense of it all. Why hadn't my father ever mentioned this to me? Why hadn't he ever spoken of Russo or the shady deals he'd been involved in? The more I dug, the darker the picture became. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them from the documents alone. I picked up the phone and dialed the one person who might know something as I. He and I hadn't spoken much since the funeral, but I needed him now. If anyone had insight into my father's past, it would be him. "Isaiah," I said when he answered, "I've found something about Dad's business. It's not good. I need you to come over." There was a brief pause on the other end, and I could almost hear his thoughts racing. "I'll be there in 20, he said, his voice grim. As I waited for him to arrive, I stared at the documents spread out before me. My mind was still reeling from the discovery. I had always looked up to my father, had trusted him implicitly, but now I wasn't sure what to believe anymore. The man who had taught me everything I knew about business, who had instilled in me the values of loyalty and hard work, seemed to have built his empire on something far darker than I had ever imagined. And as I sat there, surrounded by the remnants of my father's legacy, one thing became painfully clear. This was only the beginning. There were more secrets, more lies, and more people involved in this than I could have ever anticipated. And it was time to uncover every last one of them. Vanessa's visit to my father's office a few days after the will reading didn't come as a surprise. I had been expecting it, the way someone expects a storm to roll in after the sky darkens. She had always been calculating, even when we were married. What surprised me was how openly she was now trying to assert control, acting as if the estate was already hers to claim. I watched her from my office as she made her way up the grand staircase of my father's mansion. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, an unmistakable sound that always brought me back to our earlier years, when she was still the woman I trusted implicitly. But now, with every step she took, I could feel the layers of betrayal thickening between us. "Ethan," she greeted me with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "I thought we could have a little chat. You know, about the future, about what comes next." I raised an eyebrow, not even bothering to hide my skepticism. "The future, Vanessa. What exactly is it you think we'll be discussing?" She shrugged nonchalantly, settling into one of the plush armchairs by the window. "Oh, just some matters of family business." She paused, watching me closely, probably gauging my reaction. "You do realize that we're both entitled to share of your father's estate, don't you?" I didn't answer immediately, instead turning my gaze to the papers spread out on my desk papers I had been poring over the past few days. Vanessa had always been quick to claim what she thought was hers, but this time I had no intention of letting her have it without a fight. "You think you have some kind of right to this place just because you were married to my father once?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "You haven't been a part of this family for years." Her smile never faltered. "Oh, Ethan, you're so naive. You're too focused on what's right in front of you. You think the will is all that matters, don't you?" My heart skipped a beat. The way she said it, the cool, almost condescending tone made my blood run cold. "What do you mean by that?" Her gaze flickered briefly to the door, as if making sure no one else was around, before she leaned in slightly. "You know, your father wasn't exactly the man you thought he was. There were things he did, things you have no idea about." I felt my stomach tighten. "What are you talking about?" Vanessa's smile widened, a glint of something dark in her eyes. "You're too proud, Ethan. But there are others who are playing this game too. Bigger players than you think." She paused, watching my reaction closely. "Richard Bennett, for example. He's not here just for the will reading. He's got plans, big plans, and you're just a pawn in his game. Did you really think he was here because he cared about your family, about you?" She leaned back, crossing her legs, as if the conversation was nothing more than a casual chat over coffee. "You're not the only one with an interest in the estate." My mind raced. Richard Bennett, my father's lifelong friend, the man I had trusted for so many years, the man who had always been a fixture in our family. I couldn't fathom it. But Vanessa was right about one thing: there was more at play here than I had realized. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture was still too blurry to make sense of. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor as I moved to the window. The sprawling estate lay before me, a legacy I'd fought for my entire life. And yet, as I looked at it now, it felt less like home and more like a battlefield. Vanessa was no longer my biggest concern. It was Richard Bennett, someone who had been close to my father, someone I had trusted who now seemed to be pulling the strings behind the scenes. "Get out, Vanessa," I said, my voice hard. "I've had enough of your games." She rose slowly, her smile never wavering. "You'll see, Ethan. You'll see how deep this goes. You're not prepared for what's coming." I watched her leave, but the weight of her words hung in the air like a storm cloud, threatening to break. I needed to find out what Richard Bennett was hiding, and I needed to do it fast, before I became another victim in this twisted game of family and betrayal. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Vanessa's words kept echoing in my head, and the more I thought about them, the more I realized that Richard Bennett, the man who had been like a second father to me, wasn't the person I'd believed him to be. He'd always been there, standing by my father's side, a constant fixture in our family, offering advice, support, and friendship. But now, those memories felt tainted, distorted by the things Vanessa had hinted at during our conversation. That night, after she had left, I couldn't sleep. I kept going over the files, the old documents I'd uncovered about my father's financial dealings. My mind refused to stop, relentlessly searching for any clue, any connection that might explain why Richard Bennett was now at the center of this web of deceit. By the time the morning light broke through the curtains, I had made up my mind. I would dive deeper into Richard's past every business deal, every transaction, every relationship he'd had with my father. I had to understand how far this went. The pieces weren't fitting together, but I was certain that Richard was hiding something, and I wasn't going to stop until I found out what. I began with his business dealings. My father had always kept a strict record of every major partnership, so I started looking through the archived documents in the office. One name kept appearing, tied to various investments and transactions: Gerald Russo. I had seen the name before in the ledger I found in my father's files, but I hadn't thought much of it. Now, I realized that Richard had been involved with Russo in several deals, some legitimate, but others, well, others didn't look so clean. There were transfers of large sums of money funds that seemed to disappear into offshore accounts with little to no paper trail. I couldn't make sense of it. Richard had always prided himself on his business acumen. How could he let things slip so far? But that's what it seemed like, slip-ups. The kind of slip-ups that were easy to ignore unless you were looking for them. I spent hours poring over the documents, tracing the connections, connecting dots that didn't want to be connected. And then I found it. A meeting scheduled 3 weeks before my father's death. Richard Bennett had met with Gerald Russo at a private location. The report from my father's private investigator was clear. It wasn't just a casual business meeting. The way it was documented, the timing of the meeting, it all felt too deliberate. I called the investigator's office first thing the next morning, hoping for more information. When the investigator's voice crackled over the phone, I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I need to know everything about Richard Bennett's dealings with Gerald Russo. I want to know what happened during that meeting. There was a long pause on the other end before he responded. I'll dig through the files again, Ethan. But I'll warn you, what you're asking for is more than just business misconduct. There's a lot about Richard that isn't public knowledge. That was all I needed to hear. I hung up, heart racing. Something bigger was happening, and I was getting closer to the truth. Closer to uncovering whatever Richard Bennett had been hiding all these years. I couldn't trust anyone now, not even Richard. The man who had always been my father's closest confidant might very well be the reason my life was about to implode. I spent the rest of the day doing what I had to do, searching for answers, connecting the dots, digging deeper. I knew that the more I uncovered, the more dangerous things were going to get. But I wasn't about to stop now. I had already lost so much. I wasn't going to let Richard Bennett or anyone take what was rightfully mine. And if he had any part in my father's death, I was going to make sure he paid for it. As the sun set, I realized just how far I was willing to go. The truth was out there, and I was going to find it no matter what it cost me. The more I uncovered, the more the pieces of my father's life seemed to unravel. I had been so focused on the estate, the will, and the people closest to me. But there was something I had missed something far more sinister than I had ever imagined. It started with the phone call I received the day after I asked the investigator to look into Richard Bennett. The voice on the other end was one I didn't recognize immediately. "Ethan West?" the man asked, his tone low and gravelly. "Who's this?" I replied, already on edge. "I'm someone who knows about your father's death," he said, his words slow, deliberate, "and I think you need to know the truth." I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "What do you mean, the truth?" I asked, my voice tight with suspicion. The man hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Your father didn't die from cancer. It wasn't a natural death, Ethan. It was planned." My heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" I couldn't bring myself to believe it, but something in his voice made me listen. "I can't say much over the phone," he continued, "but I can give you the name of a place, a contact. Go there. If you want answers, you need to act fast." He gave me an address, a location in the city that I recognized. It was an old, run-down building, a place I had never thought to visit. "Go there, Ethan, and be careful who you trust. The people who did this don't want the truth to come out." I hung up, my thoughts spinning. I had to see this for myself. I couldn't just take his word for it, but the possibility that my father had been murdered hit me like a tidal wave. I drove to the address, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The building was just as I remembered, abandoned, desolate, and forgotten. But when I walked inside, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft in the room. A man was waiting for me. He was older, with graying hair and a worn-out face that spoke of too many years spent hiding from something. He didn't offer his name, just gestured for me to sit down across from him. "What do you know about my father?" I asked, my voice a mix of anger and desperation. The man exhaled sharply, then leaned in, lowering his voice. "Richard West wasn't just involved in shady business deals. He was a target long before he got sick. People wanted him gone, Ethan. People like Richard Bennett and Gerald Russo. Your father knew too much. He had information that could have brought down a lot of powerful people." I felt the room spin as the man spoke. I had heard rumors of corruption, of illegal dealings, but this was something far worse. My father hadn't just been a businessman. He had been a threat. "He was poisoned," the man continued. "It wasn't the cancer that killed him. It was slow, methodical. They made sure of it. Richard Bennett was part of it, along with Russo. They thought your father was too much of a liability. He was about to expose everything, and they couldn't let that happen." I sat back in my chair, my heart racing. "Why didn't he tell me?" I whispered, my mind reeling from the weight of this revelation. "He couldn't, Ethan. He was already being watched, but he was trying to protect you. The closer you got to the truth, the more danger you were in. That's why he left you those clues. He knew someone had to finish what he started." I wanted to scream. I wanted to hit something. The man had just told me that everything I had believed about my father's death was a lie. It wasn't just a loss. I had been lied to, manipulated, and kept in the dark. And now I was alone in this fight. "Where do I go from here?" I asked, my voice hollow. The man leaned back, his eyes dark with knowing. "You keep going, Ethan. You follow the trail, but be careful. Richard Bennett is just the beginning. The people behind this there are more of them, and they won't stop until they've silenced anyone who stands in their way." This hit too close to home. I've been the invisible sibling my whole life. I clenched my fists as I stepped into the night. This wasn't just about the estate anymore. This was about justice for my father, for all the lies and secrets he had tried to protect me from. And now, I was the only one who could finish what he started. The weight of everything was starting to crush me. It had been days since I uncovered the truth about my father's death, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking deeper into a web of deceit with every step. The deeper I dug, the more the lines between right and wrong blurred. My family, those I had trusted the most, were turning out to be the very people who had betrayed me. I stood in my father's study, staring at the photos scattered across the desk. The images of Richard Bennett, Gerald Russo, and Vanessa was all becoming too much to process. But what hit me harder than any of that was the fact that my own brother, Isaiah, had known about these dealings long before I had. He had been playing both sides, feeding me just enough information to keep me in the dark, all while working behind the scenes with my father to collect evidence. It felt like a game of chess where the rules were constantly shifting, and the players were all too willing to sacrifice me, the pawn, to protect themselves. I hadn't spoken to Isaiah since the funeral. Our relationship had always been complicated, but now, with everything I had learned, it felt like a betrayal on a level I couldn't even begin to understand. He had known the truth about my father's death, about the corruption, and he had chosen to keep it from me. The trust I had in him was shattered, and yet a part of me knew I had to confront him. I had to find out why he had kept quiet. The phone rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the screen. Isaiah's name flashed in front of me. For a moment, I debated whether to pick up. The anger and hurt coursing through me made me want to hang up immediately, but I knew I had to hear him out. I answered, my voice colder than I intended. "What do you want, Isaiah?" There was a long pause on the other end before he spoke. "I know you're angry, Ethan. I get it. But I need to explain myself. Explain after everything." I shot back, my grip tightening on the phone. "You knew what was happening. You knew about Dad, about everything, and you kept me in the dark. You let me chase ghosts while you were playing both sides." "I didn't want to hurt you," Isaiah replied, his voice strained. "I thought I could handle it, thought I could protect you without getting you involved. But I was wrong." I wanted to scream at him, to tell him that I had lost everything because of his silence, but I held back. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of his words. "You think you protected me by keeping me in the dark, by letting me trust people who were lying to my face, by letting me trust you." There was another pause, heavier this time, as though he were gathering the courage to say something. "I never wanted you to get dragged into this, Ethan, but I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. I had to help Dad. He was in too deep, and when he found out what was happening, he started making moves. He was going to expose everything, and he was going to do it with or without me." I clenched my jaw, trying to process his words. "So, you're saying you've been working with Dad, with him and with everyone else who's been lying to me?" "I had no choice," Isaiah admitted. "I didn't know how to handle it, and I didn't want to lose you in the process. I know I should have told you sooner, but I thought I could fix things without you getting hurt." I laughed bitterly, though it wasn't funny. "Fix things? You think you can fix this? You've made everything worse, Isaiah." The silence that followed was suffocating. The betrayal I felt was suffocating. I couldn't look at him the same way anymore, couldn't look at anyone the same way. The people I thought I could trust had been keeping secrets, playing games, and manipulating me into believing everything was fine while they made their moves behind my back. "I'm sorry," Isaiah said, his voice breaking. "I should have told you, but it's too late now. I'm sorry for everything. I never meant for it to end like this." I stood there, holding the phone, my thoughts in a whirlwind. My father had been murdered, my brother had betrayed me, and now I was caught in the middle of a conspiracy that went deeper than I ever could have imagined. The truth had set me free, but it had also chained me to a reality I wasn't ready for. There were decisions I had to make, hard ones, ones that would determine not only my future, but the future of my family, the family that had betrayed me. And as I stood there, staring out the window at the garden that had once been my father's pride, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. The air in my father's mansion was thick with tension. I had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the confrontation that was inevitable. Vanessa had always been a calculated woman, never one to shy away from using whatever means necessary to get what she wanted. And now, after everything that had unfolded, I knew that she was at the heart of it all. I didn't need to wait any longer. She showed up at the door, as expected, with that smug, self-assured expression I had come to hate. She still carried herself like she owned the place, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she stepped into the grand foyer. "Ethan," she greeted me, her voice smooth and saccharine. "I was hoping we could talk. I didn't bother to hide my disdain. We can talk, but I'm not sure you're going to like what I have to say." Vanessa tilted her head, pretending to be surprised. "Oh, and what exactly would that be?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I had to keep my emotions in check. She had always been a master of manipulation, of twisting words and emotions to her advantage. But this time, it was different. I wasn't the naive man who had married her all those years ago. I had seen the truth, and I wasn't going to let her hide behind her lies anymore. "Cut the act, Vanessa," I said, my voice steady. "I know what you've been up to. I know about the meetings, the manipulation, and the schemes you've been plotting with Richard Bennett and Gerald Rousseau. You thought you could take everything from me, from my family, and I'm done letting you do it." Her eyes narrowed slightly, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something fear, maybe behind her carefully crafted facade, but it was fleeting, gone in an instant, replaced by that same false smile she wore like armor. "Ethan, you have no idea what you're talking about," she said, her voice dripping with feigned innocence. "I'm only here to discuss what's best for all of us, your father's estate." "Stop," I cut her off, stepping closer. "I know about the meetings you had with Richard. I know you've been working with him to get your hands on everything my father built. But it's not just about the money, is it? You didn't just want the estate. You wanted revenge. You wanted to destroy me." She froze for a moment, and I could see the mask slipping. The cool, calculated woman I had once known seemed to waver, and in that instant, I realized just how deep her hatred ran. This wasn't just about power or money, it was personal revenge. She repeated, the word tasting foreign in her mouth. "What are you talking about?" I leaned in, my voice lowering to a dangerous whisper. "You've always hated me, haven't you, Vanessa? Ever since I caught you and Holden together, you've been plotting, planning, waiting for the right moment to tear me down. You used me, manipulated me, and when I finally wised up, you couldn't handle it." Her eyes widened, but only for a second. Then she scoffed, as if what I had said didn't matter at all. "You think it was all about you?" She laughed, a sharp, mocking sound. "You're deluded, Ethan. I never needed you. I never wanted you. I only stayed because it was convenient. Your father was the one who mattered. Your father was the one who built everything, and you were just a distraction. You think I did all this alone?" she continued, a dark gleam in her eyes. "Richard Bennett and Rousseau's were just the people I had to work with. But it's always been about you, Ethan. about your weakness. You think you're in control now, but you've always been at my mercy." I stepped back, a cold realization settling in. Vanessa had been playing me all along. From the moment we met, to the lies she had fed me during our marriage, it had all been part of her plan. I wasn't just a victim of her schemes. I had been a pawn in a much larger game, one that I hadn't seen until now. "I'm done with you, Vanessa," I said, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it before. "I'm done letting you destroy everything my father built. I'm going to make sure you pay for what you've done." For the first time, I saw real fear flash in her eyes. She hadn't expected me to fight back not like this, and that was exactly why I knew I was on the right path. The game was no longer in her favor. "I'm not going anywhere, Ethan," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You can't stop this. It's already too late." I looked at her, my resolve hardening. "No, Vanessa. It's you who's too late." I turned my back on her, walking away from the past I had been too blind to see for so long. It was time to end this, to expose every last lie, every betrayal, and to make sure Vanessa never had a chance to hurt me again. The game was over, and I was finally in control. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was getting closer to something crucial. I had spent the past week going through every single document, every scrap of evidence my father had left behind. But it was as though the truth was hiding just out of reach. Vanessa's revelations and her cold, calculated demeanor had left a bitter taste in my mouth. But it was Richard Bennett who still weighed on my mind. He had always been my father's closest friend, someone I had trusted completely. But trust had a way of disappearing when you realized how deep the lies went. I was sitting in my father's old office one afternoon, thumbing through a stack of folders, when I stumbled upon a leather-bound file I had never seen before. It was wedged beneath a pile of old correspondence, as if it had been deliberately hidden away. The name on the cover was familiar, Richard Bennett. My heart skipped a beat. I opened it slowly, almost afraid of what I might find. Inside were a series of photographs, documents, and handwritten notes. At first, they seemed like ordinary business transactions, contracts, and legal jargon. But as I dug deeper, the pieces began to fall into place, and my pulse quickened. This was no ordinary set of papers. This was the smoking gun I had been searching for. And it wasn't just about business dealings, it was far worse. There were letters, ones I had never seen before. Correspondence between my father and Richard that painted a different picture of their relationship. They had been more than business partners. Richard had been involved in some very dangerous activities. As I flipped through the pages, a name kept coming up. Gerald Russo, the same name I had seen in the ledgers. But now, there were details dated that suggested not just financial manipulation, but a web of corruption, bribery, and even murder. The letters revealed that Richard had been working with Russo for years, not just in business but in more nefarious dealings. There were mentions of laundering money, bribing officials, and even arranging accidents to remove those who stood in their way. My father had been involved too, but the deeper I read, the more it became clear that he had been trying to pull away from Richard's influence. He had tried to sever ties, to protect his family and his legacy, but it was too late. Richard had already ensnared him in a dangerous game. Then, I came across a specific document that made my blood run cold. It was an unsigned contract, dated only a few months before my father's death, detailing a plan to eliminate him. It wasn't just a financial arrangement. It was a blueprint for murder. Richard and Russo had orchestrated a plan to poison my father slowly, ensuring that he would be too weak to fight back, too ill to see what was happening. They had wanted him out of the picture to take full control of the estate, the company, everything my father had built. And when he got sick, they saw it as an opportunity. I sat back in the chair, the weight of what I had just uncovered crashing down on me. My father's death hadn't been a tragic accident or a simple case of illness. It had been a carefully orchestrated murder, planned and executed by the two men I had trusted most. Richard Bennett wasn't just a friend, he was the mastermind behind the entire operation. He had used my father, manipulated him, and then disposed of him when he was no longer useful. I gripped the file in my hands, feeling a mix of rage and disbelief. The man I had once looked up to, the man I had called a mentor, had been nothing more than a snake in the grass. And now I had the evidence to prove it. This was the document that could change everything. It was the key to exposing Richard Bennett for what he truly was, the key to bringing him down. But it wasn't enough to just have the proof. I needed to act fast. My thoughts raced as I tried to process what to do next. This wasn't just about the estate anymore. It was about justice for my father, for everything he had lost, for everything Richard had stolen from him. It was time to make Richard pay for his sins. But first, I had to figure out how to use this evidence to turn the tables. I stood up, clenching my fists in determination. I wasn't going to let Richard Bennett get away with this. Not now, not ever. This was the turning point, the moment everything changed, and I was ready to fight. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the final verdict. My heart pounded in my chest, each second stretching into eternity. I had been through so much to get here, through lies, betrayal, and a battle for everything my father had worked for. But now, finally, the truth was coming to light. I had made sure of it. Richard Bennett and Vanessa stood at the opposite end of the courtroom, their faces a mixture of disbelief and anger. I could feel their eyes on me, but I refused to let their gazes intimidate me. After everything they had done, after everything they had tried to take from me, I wasn't afraid anymore. The years of manipulation, deceit, and betrayal had all led to this moment. The judge's voice cut through the tension, and I heard the words I had been waiting for. The court finds Richard Bennett and Vanessa West guilty of fraud, conspiracy, and the unlawful manipulation of the deceased's estate. Sentencing will be determined after further investigation into their involvement in the murder of Richard West. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders as the words sank in. Justice had been served. But the feeling wasn't as sweet as I had imagined. The battle for my father's legacy had taken its toll, and while the victory was important, it felt hollow in the face of everything I had lost. I had spent months digging into the darkest corners of my family's past, and what I had found had changed me. I had uncovered the truth about my father's death, about Richard's treachery, and about the depths of Vanessa's betrayal. The fight had cost me more than just the wealth my father had left behind. It had cost me trust, it had cost me peace, and it had cost me my family. As the court session ended, I turned to face Vanessa and Richard one last time. They were both being escorted out by the officers, their faces devoid of the smug confidence they had worn throughout the trial. I walked toward them, every step feeling like the culmination of everything I had fought for. "You're going to rot in prison for the rest of your lives," I said, my voice cold and steady. "And you'll never be able to take anything from my father again. You've lost, and you'll never get a second chance to destroy my family." Vanessa's eyes burned with hatred, but she didn't respond. Richard's expression was harder to read, a mixture of frustration and something else, fear. But it was too late for them. They had made their choices, and now they would face the consequences. As I walked out of the courthouse, the weight of the past few months finally began to lift. I could feel the weight of my father's legacy settle on my shoulders. His name, his honor, his business, everything he had worked so hard for was mine to protect now. But I wasn't just fighting for a business or an estate. I was fighting for my father's memory, for the truth he had tried to protect. I stood outside, the bright sunlight feeling foreign against the darkness that had clouded my mind for so long. I had won, but it wasn't just about revenge or retribution. It was about something much more profound. It was about the truth and how it always finds its way into the light, no matter how deeply it's buried. I glanced at the street in front of me, a world that felt both familiar and new. There was still so much to rebuild, so much to process, but for the first time in months, I felt free. The chains of betrayal had finally been broken, and I could walk away from this fight knowing that justice had been served. And as I looked toward the horizon, I knew that whatever came next, I would face it head-on. With the strength my father had taught me and the wisdom of the lessons I had learned, the truth had triumphed, and I was ready for whatever came next. This story taught me that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always find its way to the surface. The journey to justice is never easy, and the cost can be steep, but it's a fight worth having. Betrayal, even from those we trust most, can shake us to our core, but it is in these moments that we truly discover our strength. The truth may be hidden by lies and manipulation, but in the end, it's the truth that will set us free. Through Ethan's struggle, I learned that family isn't just about blood, it's about trust, loyalty, and standing up for what's right. Sometimes, we have to let go of those who have betrayed us, no matter how painful it may be, in order to protect our future. The story also reminded me that justice is not always immediate. It requires patience, persistence, and unwavering belief in the right path. Ultimately, the greatest lesson is this: never underestimate the power of truth. It may take time, but when it finally emerges, it will be the thing that restores our peace and brings the healing we so desperately need.